Reading this week's portion, Mishpatim, which has so many chukim umishpatim, laws and statutes, made me think back fondly to one Yom Kippur when I was a student. And like all students, I was learning with every service I led, as, thankfully, to my colleagues, I still do. But please, I wondered, could someone tell me why the high holidays had to be situated at the very beginning of the learning curve? New pulpit, learning the minhag, the customs of every congregation. Every aspect of the service was an open question. Do they stand or sit for Shema? Is it customary to ask the president for the aliyah? Where does the choir fit into the service, and how is it different from what was done on Shabbat? And let's not forget the physical moving parts, which are essential for a seamless service, such as lifting a heavy Torah, wondering if the person I pass it to will be able to manage it, and ultimately, will the Torah portion still be in the same place it was rolled to? And if not, how would I ever find it? And even after years of leading, logistics can still complicate the pace of a service. So on that Yom Kippur morning, as I unrolled the Torah and found my place, I also found that my vision was somewhat off. And when I looked down, one of my contact lenses rested on the parchment. I'd like to think that it landed on a word like Adonai or mitzvah, mystically pointing to a larger message, but I can't be sure because I couldn't see. So I looked up and I asked for a cup of water. And that started a quiet but emphatic conversation. I should have mentioned earlier that this student pulpit, this congregation was deaf. And so I had to sign, "May I have a glass of water, please?" And now, in a deaf congregation, it is impossible to have a private conversation. So my request for water on Yom Kippur led virtually the entire congregation to engage in an exchange about what is and is not permissible on that sacred fast day. Until I said or signed that water was for my contact lens, not for drinking, I think my request scandalized the whole community. But it also left me with a deep understanding of how it feels to stand outside a community, what it is like to struggle with communication because my sign language skills were young. I came from a hearing congregation, yet in this context, I was the outsider, the one who needed to be mainstreamed into their deaf culture, which was rich with traditions and customs. In that moment, I was the one with the disability. As I grew into that student pulpit, I appreciated the support each congregant offered me, because they understood my vulnerability and my limitations, and they stood by me. They lifted me, welcomed me, made me a part of their congregation. And through them, I became more sensitive to differences. You'll remember that the last reading on Yom Kippur is the Holiness Code, which includes this important stipulation: "You shall not insult the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind." Surrounded by deaf people, I understood this in a new way. Why? because it is cruel, unfair, immoral. Because those who have differences are vulnerable, and we are expected to build up rather than punch down. Because on a day when we are reaching toward our best selves, this commandment animates what is godlike in us so that we can see the spark of divine in others. Because I struggle then, the commentator Abarbanel's terse interpretation spoke directly to me. He wrote, "This phrase is a metaphor, meaning the stronger shall not afflict the weaker." How wonderfully that congregation rallied to strengthen me in our work together. In Torah, as in life, I experienced how practical rules with moral lessons can lead to changes in attitude. And for me, as a hearing person in the ambit of the deaf community, I came to understand that experience from the inside. I share this personal reflection because this is Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, a long title for Menschlichkeit, for being accepting, kind, and supportive. Thousands of years after Sinai, we are still learning how to honor whatever way we have been made in God's image. To call something a disability focuses on what an individual cannot do. And in recent years, society has encouraged us, it's taught us to focus on abilities instead, on the positive rather than what is absent or compromised or simply different. There's a well-known story, and some say it's apocryphal, about Yitzhak Perlman, who in the course of a violin concerto broke a string, and yet he continued to play undaunted, arriving at its glorious conclusion by recalibrating every measure, weighing how to use the remaining strings on his instrument. The orchestra was amazed by his talent, and the audience rose in thunderous applause. And thereafter, Perlman said, "You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left." When we think of Yitzhak Perlman, it is for his musicianship and artistry, rather than the limited view of how he gets from place to place. According to recent statistics, people with disabilities make up the world's largest minority group. Globally, around 10% of the world's population lives with a challenge of some kind, and 20% of people in the United States also carry some difference. But the numbers are less important than our attitude. And in our own circles of association, we are all aware of many who have challenges that are hidden and interfere equally with their access to community. Listen to this famous story by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav of a prince who thought he was a rooster. His mother and father, king and queen, were devastated when their child entered the banquet hall one evening and announced, "I am no longer a prince, I am a rooster." And then the boy retreated under the dinner table, squawking like a rooster and pecking for crumbs from the floor. The child refused to wear clothing or speak in human language or even eat with utensils. And for some time, the king and queen tried without success to convince their son that he indeed was not a rooster, but a great prince. They called upon everyone in their community to help, but no one could. And finally, the king and queen called upon their rabbi for their advice. And when the rabbi arrived at the banquet hall, he too crawled underneath the table and sat next to the prince. Clucking alongside him, they pecked at crumbs on the floor, side by side. "I see that you are a rooster," the rabbi said, "but did you know that you can still be a rooster and wear clothes?" "I can," the young prince said, and the rabbi nodded. So the prince put on his royal clothing once again. Another week went by, and the rabbi told the rooster prince that he could remain a rooster, and if he wanted to, he could speak in a human language. So the boy began to speak again. And finally, the rabbi noted that he would be no less of a rooster if he chose to eat with utensils. And so the boy returned to his parents' royal table, dressed and conversing, and he ate with a knife and fork. And though the prince dressed, ate, and spoke like a person, in his heart he knew that he was still a rooster. Some differences are obvious, and others may be known only to those who are trusted companions and friends. While society has become more adept at responding to physical challenges by reconfiguring and ensuring physical access, there is still more to do. And at the same time, as mental health needs have become easier to talk about and acknowledge, we are beginning to learn how to become more supportive. What I still carry with me from my earlier congregational experience as an outsider is that rachmanis, compassion, is a precious attribute which can open the door to community, to conversation, to knowledge, and a desire to engage, and if asked, to help. What begins with the Torah's commandment, neither to curse the deaf, nor to put a stumbling block before the blind, has the potential to make our society a place for all. I conclude with one of my favorite prayers by Rabbi Sidney Greenberg, who wrote, "May the door of this synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship. May it welcome all who have cares to unburden, thanks to express, hopes to nurture. May the door of this synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity. May its threshold be no stumbling block to young or straying feet. May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness. May the synagogue be for all who enter the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life. Shabbat Shalom.